everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're really diving deep into the world of online personality typing with a fascinating source.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It's like a massive online meetup for anyone and everyone interested in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And get this subreddit has over 1 million members, which puts it in the top 1% of communities on the entire platform.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It really is. Now, of course, we can't talk to 1 million people all at once, but luckily we were able to snag a snapshot of this really active community to give us a good look at what's going on so we can really dissect those online MBTI conversations. What are people saying? What are they interested in?
I'm very interested to find that out.
Yeah, and one of the first things that struck me when looking at this snapshot was actually one of the subreddit's most important rules. No type me posts.
Oh, really? I've actually seen that in a lot of other MBTI communities online.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not that unusual. I guess I always assumed that in a community dedicated to figuring out your MBTI type, that asking others for their insights would be a pretty common thing.
Well, and it is, but it can be really overwhelming, especially for larger communities, to have people constantly requesting that type of feedback.
That makes sense, especially if someone's very new to the MBTI. They might not even know the right questions to ask to get helpful responses.
Exactly. And honestly, it's better to encourage people to start with self-assessment and really delve into the system themselves before looking for external validation.
So it's kind of like saying, don't just ask me to tell you your future, learn how to read tarot cards yourself.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to understand the system and come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
And that actually says a lot about this community as a whole. They really seem to emphasize thoughtful engagement with the MBTI rather than just, quick and easy answers.
Yeah, and that really challenges those stereotypes about online MBTI spaces just being about, surface level typing or stereotypes.
For sure. This subreddit really wants to cultivate more, meaningful conversations, ones that go beyond just the basics.
Okay, so if they're not just like playing pin the type on the person, what are people talking about them?
Well, they actually do have a dedicated space called the weekly Type Me Megathread.
Yeah.
So it's not like typing is completely off the table, but having this dedicated space probably helps keep things more organized.
So it's like containing it to a specific area.
Yeah. And that then opens up the rest of this subreddit for other types of discussions. And believe me, they get into some really interesting topics. Like they have this other thread called the Weekly Trend Mega Thread, and people discuss everything from MBTI memes to like family dynamics and even handwriting analysis in there.
Wait, handwriting analysis. What does that have to do with MBTI?
Right. It seems like they're always finding new and creative ways to kind of apply the MBTI to different aspects of life.
So they're really not afraid to have a little fun with it.
No, definitely not. And what's even more interesting is that while they do encourage these, lighter discussions, they also have this rule that allows for what they call microtrends, which are essentially more specific topics related to MBTI.
So it's a way to balance out the fun, lighthearted stuff with some more in-depth conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks to how engaged the community is. Like, they're not afraid to have fun with MBTI, but they also recognize that there's a lot of depth to it as well.
It's that balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that leads us to another really interesting thing we observed about the subreddit. The presence of, full-on debates.
Yeah.
And more, nuanced discussions.
Oh, yeah. Again, this is where you see the maturity of this community. It's not just about taking things at face value. There's this real desire to question and challenge and, really think critically about the MBTI.
So, give me an example. What are some of these, hot-button MBTI issues that they're tackling?
Well, one thread that really stood out to me was titled, "Can MBTI types change over time?" And this sparked a really interesting conversation about personality development and whether our MBTI type is something that's set in stone or if it's more fluid.
Oh, that is a big one.
It is.
It's like, are we talking nature versus nurture here? Do our personalities evolve as we grow and experience life, or are we kind of, fundamentally wired a certain way?
Right. It's a fascinating debate. And then on a slightly more technical level, there was another thread that asked, what does inferior C look like in you?
Okay, and for those who maybe need a quick refresher, remind us, what is inferior C?
Sure. So basically, MBTI is based on this idea that we each have a set of cognitive functions that influence how we process information, how we make decisions, how we interact with the world around us. And each of these functions operates at different levels of consciousness. So you have your dominant function, which is kind of like your go-to strength. It's the one you're most comfortable using. And then you have your inferior function, which is essentially the opposite of your dominant function, tends to be less developed, almost like a blind spot.
Okay.
And in this case, C stands for extroverted sensing, which is all about, experiencing the world through your senses, what you see, hear, touch, taste, smell.
So someone with inferior C might struggle with things like being present in the moment or might miss details in their surroundings because they're more in their head.
Exactly. They might be more drawn to the world of thoughts and ideas rather than what's happening in the physical world around them. And this thread was all about people sharing their personal experiences with their own inferior say, which can manifest in so many different ways for different people.
It's like, yeah, really digging into the nuances of these personality types, how they actually play out in real life.
Exactly. And that's what makes these online communities so valuable, right? They provide this platform for people to kind of go beyond those stereotypes and share their own personal experiences.
It's a good reminder that MBTI is about more than just putting people into boxes. It's really about understanding the complexities of what makes us unique.
Absolutely. And speaking of interconnectedness, that kind of reminds me of another really interesting thing about this whole Rumbity world.
Okay, what's that?
It's not just a single subreddit. It's like this whole network of different interconnected communities.
Oh, really? It's like a whole, like, choose your own adventure for personality exploration.
Yeah, exactly. So they have this whole section dedicated to what they call subcategories, and like they have the basics covered, like there's introverts and extroverts.
Of
But
course, you got to have those.
right, but it goes so much deeper than that. They have communities for pretty much every single MBTI type.
Oh.
So like, let's say you're an INFJ and you want to connect with other INFJs. Boom, there's a subreddit for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah. They also have subreddits for broader groupings like idealists or rationals. And get this, they also have connections to other personality systems like the Enneagram, Big Five, Socionics.
Really? So it's not just like MBTI or BUS. People are really like branching out.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense, right? We're complex beings. To try to like reduce ourselves down to just one system or label can feel kind of limiting.
Totally. It's like trying to describe every color in the rainbow, but you're only allowed to use like 3 crayons.
Exactly. Each system kind of offers a different lens through which to view ourselves and others. So like MBTI might focus on your cognitive preferences, while the Enneagram is more about your core motivations, your fears, that kind of thing.
So by looking at these different systems, you can get like a more complete picture of your personality.
Exactly. Like you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle of yourself.
I like that.
And I think this really speaks to the power of these online communities. They give people this space to explore and to discuss and to compare and contrast these different systems,
Right.
to connect with others who are on a similar journey.
It's like, yeah, a global personality summit, but from the comfort of your own home.
I love that. And,
Yeah.
and another thing that's interesting is how this whole online MBTI community reflects this growing interest in personality typing in general, especially among like younger generations.
Oh, for sure. Why do you think that is? Like, what is it about this generation that's got them so into MBTI?
Well, I think it's probably a few different things. Like, for one, we live in a world that feels increasingly complex and uncertain, right? And I think people crave stability. They crave a sense of understanding both of themselves and of, the world around them. And MBTI, with its framework of these different types and functions, can offer a sense of structure and order.
Yeah, it's like, if you're lost in the woods, even having a slightly inaccurate map can feel reassuring.
Exactly. And then there's that like social aspect to it too, right? Like MBTI has become this kind of social currency.
Yeah.
A way for people, especially younger generations, to connect with others who share similar traits, similar experiences.
It's like those which Disney princess are you quizzes, but like way more in depth.
Exactly. And we can't forget the power of social media either.
No, it's not. It's everywhere.
Right. Social media has played a huge role in popularizing the MBTI, especially among those younger generations. I mean, it's so easy to just be scrolling through TikTok or Instagram and come across MBTI memes,
Well, sure.
or infographics or people discussing their type in the comments.
It's everywhere.
It really is. And this viral nature of the MBTI has definitely made it more mainstream. It's like this really accessible tool for self-expression and connection,
It's like a perfect storm of self-discovery and like intellectual stimulation, but also like social connection all wrapped into one.
Exactly.
It's really no wonder that it's become such a phenomenon. But, for all the excitement about the MBTI, it's important to remember that, like anything, it's not without its criticism.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like no system is perfect. And it's really important to approach any kind of personality typing with a critical eye.
Definitely.
So before we jump into some of those criticisms, let's just take a second to think about everything we've talked about so far with this Rumby community, What really stands out to you? What are your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see how this online community really reflect both the excitement around the MBTI, but also a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of wanting to understand this stuff, but also recognizing that, it's not a perfect system.
Right. So let's talk about some of those criticisms. What are some of the things that people have brought up? What are the concerns about the MBTI? Well, one of the big ones is this idea of validity and reliability. So some critics argue that, the MBTI doesn't actually predict behavior very consistently. So just because you test as a certain type today doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the same result if you take the test again, a few months down the line.
Yeah, it's not like a fingerprint. It's not like static.
Exactly. Our personalities are way too complex for that. They're constantly evolving, and they can shift depending on, the situation we're in, our mood, the people around us, all sorts of factors.
It's like, I'm not always a morning person, but when I am, look out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where trying to capture all those nuances within just 16 types can feel, I don't know, a little bit limiting.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to another criticism that I've heard, which is that MBTI can be a little too black and white sometimes. You know what I mean? Like you're either an introvert or an extrovert, a thinker or a feeler, but in reality, most of us probably fall somewhere along a spectrum, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's very rare to find someone who, perfectly embodies every single trait of their type. We're all this unique blend of different preferences
Right.
and tendencies.
It's like saying, if you love pizza, you must hate vegetables. It's like, not
Yeah,
necessarily.
there's so much nuance. And I think that's where, again, the MBTI, it's important to remember these types are really just broad frameworks. They're not, definitive boxes.
Right. So, given all of that, should we just give up on MBTI entirely? I mean, is it time to just throw in the towel?
I don't think so. Like any tool, the MBTI has its limitations for
Right.
sure, but it also has its strength. And I think the key is just approaching it with a critical and discerning eye.
Yeah, it's like, if you're using a map to navigate a new city, it can give you a general lay of the land, but you don't want to, solely rely on it and miss out on, those cool little side streets.
Exactly. I love that analogy. The MBTI can be a really great starting point for self-discovery for sure. It can introduce you to these new ways of understanding yourself and others. But it's up to you to kind of take it from there. Explore those ideas further, question things, challenge yourself, and ultimately come to your own conclusions.
So don't just, take the label and run with it, really. Use
Yeah.
it as a starting point.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so exciting about this whole realm of personality typing. It's an invitation to embark on this journey of self-discovery, to connect with others, to have these really interesting conversations about, what makes us pick.
Yeah, it's like, we've said it before, but it's like joining a giant book club. But instead of discussing books, we're discussing ourselves.
I love that. And,
Yeah.
just like in a book club, the real magic happens when we share our perspectives, when we challenge each other's assumptions, and when we learn from each other's experiences.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
100%. Because ultimately, the greatest insights come from within. The MBTI and communities like RumTT can provide some really helpful guidance and support along the way. But the most rewarding discoveries, those are the ones that we make ourselves.
Well said. This has been quite a journey. From decoding subreddit rules to debating the whole nature of personality, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have. It's been a pleasure chatting about all of this with you.
Likewise. And to all our listeners out there, we leave you with this. What is it about personality that really fascinates you? Where do you want your self-discovery journey to take you?
And remember, there's a whole world of personality exploration out there, both online and offline. Don't be afraid to, ask questions, embrace the unknown. You never know what you might discover.
Happy exploring, everyone. We'll see you next time.